Lawrence Reynolds stands in the control tower, watching as hundreds of Sky Elite planes sit motionless on runways nationwide. A text message lights up his phone: "You've destroyed everything." He smiles, remembering how it all began 3 days ago with a boarding pass and racial slur. Before we dive into this incredible story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. If this opening caught your attention, hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of justice served. Now, let's rewind to see how one denied seat led to an entire airline being grounded. Lawrence Reynolds was no ordinary businessman. At 45, the brilliant black tech CEO had built CyberVault Systems from nothing into a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity empire. His journey from the struggling neighborhoods of Detroit to the pinnacle of the tech world made him a living embodiment of the American dream. With sharp features, calculating brown eyes, and an impeccable sense of style, Lawrence commanded respect in every room he entered. Or at least, he should have. On that fateful Tuesday morning, Lawrence arrived at Atlanta International Airport 3 hours before his flight. The stakes were high. This trip to Silicon Valley would finalize CyberVault's acquisition of Gentek, a smaller security firm with revolutionary artificial intelligence technology. The merger would cement CyberVault's position as the undisputed leader in the cybersecurity space. Dressed in a tailored charcoal Armani suit, crisp white shirt, and Italian leather shoes, Lawrence approached the Sky Elite Airlines premium check-in counter. He placed his platinum frequent flyer card and identification on the counter. "Good morning," he said with a practiced smile. The Sky Elite check-in agent, Heather Wilson, a thin woman with blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, barely glanced up. "Destination?" she asked curtly. "San Francisco. I have a first-class reservation." Heather's eyes narrowed slightly as she looked up, taking in Lawrence's appearance with a quick, assessing gaze. She typed into her computer with exaggerated slowness. "I'll need to see additional identification," she said, despite his passport and driver's license already sitting on the counter. Lawrence maintained his composure, sliding his company ID across the counter. "Is there a problem?" "Just being thorough," Heather replied with a thin smile. She scrutinized each piece of identification, holding them up to the light, comparing photos to his face multiple times. Lawrence noticed a white businessman in line behind him shifting impatiently. When that passenger's turn came, Heather processed his first-class ticket with a warm smile and minimal ID checking, sending him on his way in less than a minute. After 15 minutes of verification, Heather finally issued Lawrence's boarding pass. "Gate A23, she said without making eye contact. At the gate, the same pattern repeated. While white passengers in first class walked through with a cursory glance at their boarding passes, Heather, who was now working at the gate, stopped Lawrence again. "Sir, I need to verify your boarding pass once more," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "You just checked me in 30 minutes ago," Lawrence replied calmly. "It's procedure," she insisted, examining his boarding pass as if it might be counterfeit. "We've had issues with people trying to upgrade themselves." Lawrence felt eyes on him. He'd experienced this kind of treatment before, but it never stopped stinging. After another unnecessary verification, he was finally allowed to board. On the plane, Lawrence stored his briefcase in the overhead compartment and settled into seat 2A. He had just connected his phone to the in-flight Wi-Fi when a shadow fell across him. "Excuse me, sir." A flight attendant with "Bradley Cooper" on his name tag loomed over Lawrence. "Can I see your boarding pass?" Lawrence handed it over, keeping his expression neutral despite having shown it 3 times already. Bradley frowned at the boarding pass. "There seems to be some confusion. This seat is reserved." "Yes, for me," Lawrence said, pointing to the boarding pass. "Lawrence Reynolds, seat 2A. Bradley's frown deepened. "One moment, please." He returned moments later with an older white man in an ill-fitting suit. "This gentleman has the same seat assignment." There must have been a double booking. The white passenger, Walter Thompson, a balding man with a ruddy complexion, looked down at Lawrence with obvious disdain. "I always sit in 2A. There must be some mistake." Lawrence pulled out his phone. "I booked this seat 3 months ago. I have the confirmation email." Bradley barely glanced at the evidence. "I'm sorry, sir, but Mr. Thompson is a Diamond Elite member. Perhaps you were upgraded and the system made a mistake." "I paid for first class," Lawrence stated firmly, beginning to record the interaction discreetly on his phone. "I didn't receive an upgrade." "Well, something clearly went wrong," Bradley insisted. "I'm going to have to ask you to move to another seat." "There are no other first-class seats available," Lawrence pointed out, looking at the nearly full cabin. "Then I'm afraid you'll need to move to economy," Bradley said, his tone suggesting he was being generous. "We can refund the difference in fare." "This is ridiculous," Lawrence said, his comms starting to crack. "I booked and paid for this seat." Walter Thompson interjected, "Look, I don't have time for this. I have an important meeting. Just move him." Bradley lowered his voice to a threatening whisper. "Sir, if you continue to be difficult, I'll have to call security. We can't delay the flight for this misunderstanding." Lawrence looked around. Other passengers were staring. Some looked uncomfortable, others impatient. He knew exactly what was happening, but also knew that escalating the situation would likely end with him being escorted off the plane, missing his crucial meeting. "Fine," he said finally, gathering his belongings. "I'll move. But I want your full name and employee ID number." Bradley straightened up, clearly relieved. "Of course, sir. And again, we apologize for the inconvenience." As Lawrence moved toward economy, he heard Walter Thompson say to Bradley, "Thanks for sorting that out. Some people just don't know their place." In economy, Lawrence was assigned a middle seat between a man who spilled over the armrest and a woman with a crying infant. The contrast to his spacious first-class seat couldn't have been more stark. From his cramped position, he could see Walter Thompson being served champagne in his rightful seat. Midway through the flight, Lawrence got up to use the restroom and overheard Bradley talking to another flight attendant near the galley. "Can you believe that guy thought he belonged in first class?" Bradley snickered. "Probably his first time on a plane." The female attendant laughed. "I know, right? The look on his face when you moved him was priceless." They fell silent as Lawrence walked past. Neither realized they had just humiliated one of the most powerful tech CEOs in the country. A man who never forgot a slight. Lawrence's Bentley rental glided through the streets of Palo Alto as the setting sun cast long shadows across Silicon Valley. Despite the humiliation he'd endured on the flight, his face remained impassive as he pulled up to the Rosewood Sandhill, one of the most exclusive hotels in the area. The valet rushed forward, but paused momentarily upon seeing Lawrence's face, a hesitation Lawrence had experienced countless times before. "Welcome to Rosewood, sir," the young man recovered quickly, opening the door with practiced elegance. Lawrence nodded, handing over the keys. "Thank you. I have luggage in the trunk." In his lavish suite, Lawrence loosened his tie and poured himself 2 fingers of Macallan 25, a ritual after difficult days. He stared out at the stunning view of the Santa Cruz Mountains but saw none of it. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the day's events, calculating, planning. His phone rang, displaying his executive assistant's name. "Jasmine," he answered, "what do you have for me?" "Mr. Reynolds, the CyberVault team has finalized the aviation security software tests," Jasmine Washington reported. "The results exceeded expectations. The Department of Transportation is very impressed." This news would normally have delighted Lawrence. CyberVault's new aviation security platform represented 3 years of work and hundreds of millions in investment. The software promised to revolutionize airline security protocols nationwide, with SkyElite Airlines being one of the primary potential clients. "Good," he said simply. "And the Gentech acquisition papers?" Ready for tomorrow's meeting, sir. After ending the call, Lawrence sank into a plush armchair, his thoughts drifting to his childhood. Growing up in Detroit's East Side, young Lawrence had been fascinated by airplanes. He remembered pressing his face against the chain-link fence at Detroit Metropolitan Airport, watching the massive machines take flight, dreaming of one day being among the men in suits who boarded them with such confidence. His father, a factory worker who never finished high school, had noticed this fascination. On Lawrence's 10th birthday, despite their limited means, his father had somehow scraped together enough money for a discovery flight at a small local airport. That 30-minute experience in a tiny Cessna had changed Lawrence's life, cementing his love of aviation and showing him a world beyond their neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on him that decades later, after building a tech empire worth billions, he could be dismissed so easily by airline staff who saw only his skin color. Lawrence's phone rang again. This time it was Victoria Chen, his longtime friend and attorney. "Victoria," he answered, "I was about to call you." "Lawrence," Victoria's voice was concerned. "How was your flight?" Lawrence recounted the incident in precise detail. Victoria listened without interrupting, but he could hear her sharp intake of breath at several points. "This isn't isolated, Lawrence," she said when he finished. "My firm has received multiple discrimination complaints against Sky Elite in the past year alone. It's becoming a pattern." "Is that so?" Lawrence replied, his voice deceptively calm. "Send me everything you have." After hanging up, Lawrence made a series of calls to business associates, speaking cryptically about contingency plans and alternative investments. He then spent hours researching on his laptop, his expression growing more determined with each passing minute. The following morning, Lawrence arrived at Gentech headquarters for the acquisition meeting. The company's executives were gathered in the boardroom, eager to finalize the deal that would make many of them instant millionaires. Maxwell Parker, Gentech's CEO, greeted Lawrence warmly, but his smile faltered as he noted Lawrence's unusual demeanor. "Everything all right, Lawrence?" Maxwell asked. "You seem distracted." "Just thinking about some unexpected developments," Lawrence replied cryptically. The meeting proceeded, with lawyers and financial advisors presenting the terms of the acquisition. When it came time to sign the final papers, however, Lawrence surprised everyone. "Gentlemen, ladies," he said, standing up. "I've decided to postpone this acquisition for 30 days. The room fell silent. Maxwell looked stunned. "Is there a problem with the terms?" "We can renegotiate if the terms are fine," Lawrence interrupted. "This is about something else entirely. I'll be in touch soon to reschedule." Back at his hotel, Lawrence called Jasmine. "I need you to research Sky Elite Airlines. Ownership structure, financial status, everything." "Sky Elite?" Jasmine sounded confused. "I thought we were focusing on the Gentech acquisition." "Plans have changed," Lawrence said. "And cancel my return flight. Book me on my private jet instead." Within hours, Jasmine reported back. "Sky Elite is in financial trouble, sir. They're seeking investors for a bailout. Their stock has been declining steadily for the past 6 quarters. Lawrence's lips curved into a slight smile. "Interesting. Connect me with Harold Bennett." Harold Bennett, a sharp-minded investment banker who had helped Lawrence with previous acquisitions, answered on the first ring. "Lawrence, to what do I owe this pleasure?" "Harold, I'm looking at an opportunity that's right up your alley," Lawrence said. "How would you like to help me acquire an airline?" The digital clock on Lawrence's laptop flipped to 3:27 a.m. as he continued poring over Sky Elite's financial reports. The hotel suite was littered with papers, empty coffee cups, and room service trays. He had barely slept since the incident on the plane, driven by a purpose that transcended mere revenge. What would you do if you were in Lawrence's position? Would you walk away from the humiliation or fight back against the system? Comment number 1: If you believe Lawrence should pursue justice at all costs, or number 2 if you think he should focus on his own business instead. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of people standing up against discrimination. As Lawrence analyzed the airline's debt structure, his mind flashed back to other moments when his achievements had been overshadowed by prejudice. The venture capitalist who had assumed he was the janitor at his first pitch meeting. The real estate agent who, accidentally, showed him only properties in predominantly black neighborhoods despite his 7-figure budget. The restaurant maitre d', who had seated him by the kitchen despite his reservation for the best table. Each slight had fueled his determination. Each barrier had made him more strategic. Now, he had the resources to do more than just succeed personally, he could change the system itself. Lawrence's phone buzzed with a text from Harold Bennett. Breakfast meeting confirmed. Maplewood Restaurant, 7 a.m. The Maplewood was one of Silicon Valley's most exclusive dining establishments, where tech moguls and venture capitalists conducted their most sensitive business deals over gourmet omelets and artisanal coffee. Lawrence arrived precisely at 7 a.m., dressed impeccably in a navy Tom Ford suit. Harold was already seated at a corner table, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, radiating the confidence of a man who had orchestrated billions in transactions. "You look like hell," Harold observed as Lawrence sat down. "I assume this isn't a social call?" Lawrence smiled thinly. "When have I ever called you for something social?" After ordering, Lawrence laid out his plan. He wanted to acquire Sky Elite Airlines. Not through a straightforward purchase offer, but through a carefully orchestrated series of stock acquisitions through shell companies. Harold's eyebrows rose higher with each detail. "This is aggressive, even for you," he said when Lawrence finished. "A hostile takeover of an airline? That's not just buying a company, that's entering a heavily regulated industry with enormous operational complexities." "I'm aware," Lawrence replied calmly. "And the personal risk is calculated," Lawrence interrupted. "Sky Elite is vulnerable. Their management is complacent. Their customer service metrics are abysmal. And," he added, his voice hardening slightly, "they have a corporate culture problem I intend to fix." Harold studied him for a long moment. "This is about more than business, isn't it?" Lawrence didn't answer directly. "Can you set up the necessary structures by this afternoon?" Harold sighed. "It'll cost you double my usual fee. Triple it if you can have everything ready in 3 hours." By noon, Lawrence had established 5 shell companies, each with enough financial opacity to mask his involvement. By 2 p.m., these entities had begun quietly purchasing Sky Elite stock on the open market. Meanwhile, in Sky Elite's Atlanta headquarters, Richard Campbell, the airline CEO, was leading an executive meeting. A balding man with cold blue eyes and a perpetual scowl, Campbell had risen through the ranks by ruthlessly cutting costs, often at the expense of customer experience and employee satisfaction. "Our stock price dipped again this quarter," he announced, glaring at his chief financial officer. "We need to find more ways to maximize revenue from premium cabins. We've already reduced legroom in economy to add 2 more first-class seats," the CFO replied defensively. "Then raise the prices," Campbell snapped. "Our Diamond Elite members will pay." As the meeting continued, Campbell's assistant slipped in and whispered something in his ear. He frowned. "Are you sure?" The assistant nodded. "Apparently there's unusual trading activity in our stock," Campbell announced to the room. "Nothing to worry about, probably just a hedge fund taking a position." What Campbell didn't know was that Lawrence was systematically acquiring significant blocks of Sky Elite stock. While participating in a virtual board meeting for Cybervault, Lawrence was simultaneously directing Harold to increase purchasing through their shell companies. By the end of the trading day, Lawrence had acquired nearly 15% of Sky Elite's outstanding shares, still below the threshold that would require public disclosure, but enough to make financial analysts take notice. The next morning, financial news networks began speculating about the identity of Sky Elite's mystery buyer. "An unknown investor has been aggressively purchasing Sky Elite stock," reported one analyst. This comes at a time when the airline is particularly vulnerable due to declining revenue and customer satisfaction scores. Campbell sent a company-wide email attempting to quell concerns. Recent stock movements are routine market fluctuations. Sky Elite remains strong and focused on delivering shareholder value. Any rumors of financial instability or takeover attempts are unfounded. Meanwhile, Victoria Chen had been compiling evidence of discrimination cases against Sky Elite. I've gathered testimonies from 47 passengers who experienced racial discrimination on Sky Elite flights in the past year alone, she reported to Lawrence via secure video call. The pattern is undeniable. And the flight attendant and gate agent for my flight? Lawrence asked. Bradley Cooper has 6 formal complaints in his personnel file, all from minority passengers. Heather Wilson has 8. Neither has faced any disciplinary action. Lawrence nodded, unsurprised. Keep building the case. I want it airtight. By the end of the week, Lawrence's shell companies had acquired 30% of Sky Elite stock, crossing the threshold that required regulatory disclosure. The news broke on a Friday afternoon, sending shock waves through the financial markets. Sky Elite shares soar amid takeover speculation, read the headlines. Yet the identity of the buyer remained hidden behind the complex web of shell companies Harold had created. In Sky Elite's executive offices, panic was setting in. Who the hell is buying us out? Campbell demanded during an emergency meeting. And why weren't we prepared for this? The CFO looked pale. The purchases were structured to stay under the radar until now. Whoever's doing this knows exactly what they're doing. Well, find out who it is. Campbell slammed his fist on the table. And prepare our poison pill defenses. Nobody takes my company without a fight. Do you think Lawrence's method of secretly buying the airline is justified after how he was treated? Or is he going too far? Comment number 1 if you support his takeover plan, or number 2 if you think this is excessive. Like this video if you've ever witnessed discrimination in the travel industry and subscribe for the next part of this incredible story. The sleek private jet touched down at Atlanta International Airport, the same airport where Lawrence's humiliation had begun just 1 week earlier. As the plane taxied to the private aviation terminal, Lawrence adjusted his custom-made suit and mentally prepared for the confrontation ahead. The car is waiting, Mr. Reynolds, the pilot announced as the jet came to a stop. Lawrence nodded. Thank you, Calvin. I may need to leave quickly later today. A black Mercedes S-Class with tinted windows was waiting on the tarmac. Lawrence slid into the back seat, checking his watch, 2:15 p.m., 45 minutes before his scheduled meeting at Sky Elite headquarters. Everything is set, Victoria Chen said from the seat beside him. She had flown in from New York the previous night to be present for this crucial meeting. They have no idea who's coming. Lawrence smiled slightly. Perfect. The official story was that Lawrence Reynolds, CEO of CyberVault Systems, was meeting with Sky Elite executives to discuss a potential partnership involving CyberVault's new aviation security platform. What Richard Campbell and his team didn't know was that they were about to meet the mystery investor who now owned a controlling interest in their company. Sky Elite's headquarters occupied a gleaming 40-story tower in downtown Atlanta. The building's lobby featured a massive sculpture of a stylized aircraft soaring upward, symbolizing the company's aspirations that had been tarnished by financial mismanagement and a toxic corporate culture. Lawrence and Victoria were escorted to the executive floor by an assistant who clearly hadn't been informed of Lawrence's true identity. Mr. Campbell is very excited about the potential partnership, she chirped as they rode the elevator. He's gathered all our top executives for the presentation. The boardroom was impressive, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. Around a massive mahogany table sat Sky Elite's executive team, all white, mostly male, all dressed in near-identical dark suits. Richard Campbell rose from his chair at the head of the table, extending his hand with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Reynolds, welcome to Sky Elite. We're thrilled about the possibilities of working with Cybervault. Lawrence shook his hand firmly. Thank you for accommodating this meeting on short notice. Campbell gestured to the seat at the opposite end of the table. Please, we've prepared a presentation on our current security protocols and where we see potential integration points with your technology. As Lawrence and Victoria took their seats, Lawrence noticed the subtle glances exchanged among the executives, the kind of looks he had experienced throughout his career when people were surprised to see a black man in a position of power. Before we begin, Campbell said, I understand you flew in on your private jet. I hope you didn't have any unpleasant experiences with commercial aviation that drove you to private travel. He chuckled at his own joke. Several executives laughed politely. Lawrence maintained his poker face. Actually, I did have a rather interesting experience on a Sky Elite flight recently. Campbell's smile faltered slightly. Well, I hope it wasn't too unpleasant. We pride ourselves on customer service. I'm sure you do, Lawrence replied evenly. In fact, that experience is partly why I'm here today. Campbell nodded to his chief marketing officer, who began a slick presentation about Sky Elite's market position and customer service initiatives. Lawrence noticed how the slides carefully avoided mentioning the airline's plummeting customer satisfaction scores and financial difficulties. 30 minutes into the presentation, Campbell was practically gloating. As you can see, Mr. Reynolds, Sky Elite is positioned for growth. With the right technology partner, and perhaps some additional investment, we could revolutionize the industry. Lawrence remained silent for a moment, then stood up slowly. That's an interesting perspective, Mr. Campbell. Now let me share mine. He walked to the front of the room, taking control of the presentation screen. With a few taps on his tablet, he replaced Sky Elite's corporate presentation with a video recording. This was taken on Sky Elite Flight 1577 from Atlanta to San Francisco last week, Lawrence said as the recording began playing. On screen, Bradley Cooper could be clearly seen demanding that Lawrence give up his first-class seat to Walter Thompson. The discriminatory comments, the threats, the humiliation, all captured in high definition. Campbell's face drained of color as he recognized Lawrence from the video. The other executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. When the video ended, Lawrence looked directly at Campbell. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm the black man your employees decided didn't belong in first class. The room was silent. Campbell attempted to recover. Mr. Reynolds, I had no idea. This is clearly a misunderstanding. I personally assure you that Sky Elite does not condone, save it, Lawrence interrupted. This isn't about one incident. This is about a pattern. He nodded to Victoria, who distributed folders to each executive. These folders contain 47 documented cases of racial discrimination by Sky Elite employees in the past year alone, Lawrence continued. Including 6 complaints against flight attendant Bradley Cooper and 8 against gate agent Heather Wilson, both of whom were involved in my incident. Campbell flipped through the folder, his face growing increasingly pale. Mr. Reynolds, while these allegations are concerning, I don't see how this relates to our technology partnership discussion. Lawrence smiled coldly. I'm not here to discuss a technology partnership, Mr. Campbell. I'm here because I now own 51% of Sky Elite Airlines. The room erupted in chaos. Executives whispered urgently to each other. Some frantically typed on their phones. Campbell stood up, his face contorted with anger. That's impossible, he sputtered. The board would have been notified of any significant stock acquisition. Not if it was done through multiple shell companies, Lawrence replied calmly. A strategy one learned from watching corporations like yours evade accountability for decades. Lawrence projected a new slide showing the complex ownership structure he had created. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I control Sky Elite Airlines. My first act as majority shareholder will be to address the systemic discrimination within this company. Campbell's shock gave way to calculation. He motioned for the other executives to leave the room. When they were alone except for Victoria, Campbell's demeanor changed completely. "Look," he said in a lowered voice, "I understand you're upset about what happened. I would be too. But surely we can come to some arrangement that satisfies everyone." Lawrence raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening. A private settlement. Very generous. Plus guaranteed first-class upgrades for life," Campbell offered with a forced smile. "We can make this whole unpleasant situation go away." Lawrence leaned forward. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about me getting compensated for one bad experience. This is about changing a system that treats people differently based on the color of their skin." "Noble sentiments," Campbell replied, his voice hardening. "But this is business. You may own a majority stake, but I've been running airlines for 20 years. The board won't simply roll over because a tech CEO wants to play airline executive." Lawrence stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "I don't want to play airline executive, Mr. Campbell. I want to transform an industry that has failed too many people for too long." As Lawrence and Victoria turned to leave, Campbell called after them. "You have no idea what you're getting into, Reynolds. Airlines aren't tech companies. You can't just write some code and fix everything." Lawrence paused at the door. "You're right about one thing, Campbell. I can't fix everything with code. Some things require more direct intervention." As they walked toward the elevator, Victoria whispered, "That went even better than expected." Lawrence nodded. "He still thinks this is a negotiation. He'll learn soon enough that it's a takeover." Back in the boardroom, Campbell was already on the phone with Sky Elite's legal team, his face flushed with anger. "I don't care what it takes," he growled into the phone. "Find a way to stop him. Nobody comes into my company and threatens me like that." What Campbell didn't realize was that Lawrence Reynolds wasn't just threatening, he was executing a plan that had been set in motion the moment Bradley Cooper had asked him to give up his seat. A plan that would send shockwaves through the entire airline industry. The morning after the confrontation, Lawrence arrived at Sky Elite headquarters at 7 a.m., 2 hours before most executives typically showed up. He had arranged for temporary office space on the executive floor, directly across from Richard Campbell's corner office. A calculated move that sent a clear message: Lawrence Reynolds wasn't going away. By 7:30 a.m., Lawrence had already met with Diana Foster, Sky Elite's HR director, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a nervous demeanor. She arrived clutching a thick folder of personnel files Lawrence had requested. "Mr. Reynolds," she began hesitantly, "some of these files are quite sensitive. Normally, they would require board approval to. I own 51% of this company, Ms. Foster," Lawrence interrupted gently. "Consider this board approved." Diana nodded, sliding the folder across the desk. "These are all the discrimination complaints filed internally in the past 3 years. As you requested." Lawrence opened the folder and began reviewing the documents. What he found confirmed his suspicions but was still shocking in its scope. Dozens of complaints from both passengers and employees of color, most dismissed with minimal investigation. Notes in the margins revealed a disturbing pattern of victim blaming and excuse-making. "Did you compile these reports personally?" Lawrence asked. Diana hesitated before answering. "Yes. And I submitted summaries to Mr. Campbell quarterly." "And what actions were taken based on your reports?" She looked down. "Very few. Mr. Campbell felt that most complaints were exaggerated or misunderstandings." Lawrence nodded, making a note. "I see Bradley Cooper and Heather Wilson both have multiple complaints, yet they received promotions rather than disciplinary action. Mr. Campbell considered them loyal employees who understood the company culture," Diana replied, unable to meet Lawrence's eyes. "And what culture is that exactly?" Diana didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. By midday, Lawrence had established a temporary command center in his borrowed office. Victoria Chen had arrived with a team of 3 attorneys who specialized in corporate discrimination cases. They methodically reviewed personnel files, passenger complaints, and internal communications. "Look at this," Victoria said, handing Lawrence a printed email. It was from Richard Campbell to his executive team, dated 6 months earlier, regarding the recent complaints about first-class service. "Remember that our premium cabins are the profit centers of this airline. We need to ensure these spaces maintain a certain atmosphere that our Diamond Elite members expect. Use your judgment when handling upgrade requests and seating arrangements." The implication was clear but carefully worded to maintain plausible deniability. Lawrence added it to his growing evidence file. At 2 p.m., Sky Elite's board of directors convened an emergency meeting. Lawrence attended as the majority shareholder, accompanied by Victoria. The tension in the room was palpable as Lawrence took his seat. Board Chairman William Preston, a silver-haired former airline executive, called the meeting to order. "We're here to address the unusual situation regarding Mr. Reynolds' acquisition of Sky Elite stock." Richard Campbell sat rigid in his chair, barely containing his fury. "With all due respect," Campbell interjected before Lawrence could speak, "we need to discuss the legality of this hostile takeover attempt. Our legal team believes there are grounds to challenge. Your legal team is welcome to try," Lawrence replied calmly. "But my ownership position is solid. The SEC filings were completed this morning." Preston cleared his throat. "Mr. Reynolds, while we acknowledge your significant ownership stake, running an airline requires specialized knowledge and experience. The board has concerns about any drastic changes to leadership or operations." Lawrence smiled slightly. "I appreciate those concerns, Chairman Preston. Let me assure you that I'm not here to dismantle Sky Elite. I'm here to transform it into the industry leader it claims to be." He distributed folders to each board member. These documents detail a pattern of discrimination that extends far beyond isolated incidents. They represent a systemic failure of leadership and corporate culture. The board members flipped through the pages, some appearing genuinely shocked, others carefully maintaining neutral expressions. "This is absurd," Campbell sputtered. "Cherry-picked complaints from disgruntled employees and passengers. Every airline deals with these issues." "Every airline may face complaints," Lawrence agreed. "Not every airline promotes employees with multiple discrimination incidents on their records. Not every airline has internal communications suggesting first class should maintain a certain atmosphere that somehow always results in people of color being treated differently." A vote was called on Lawrence's proposal to establish an independent investigation into Sky Elite's discrimination issues. Despite Campbell's vehement objections, the measure passed by a narrow margin. However, Lawrence's motion to immediately remove Bradley Cooper and Heather Wilson from customer-facing positions failed, with the board citing procedural concerns. As the meeting adjourned, Campbell approached Lawrence. "You won a small victory today, Reynolds. But this board has been with me for years. They won't turn on me so easily." "They won't have to turn on you," Lawrence replied. "You'll do that yourself." That evening, as Lawrence worked late in his temporary office, he received unexpected visitors. 3 Sky Elite gate agents and a flight attendant asked to speak with him privately. "We saw the news about your stock purchase," said one gate agent, a young black woman named Tasha Robinson. "And we heard about the board meeting today." "Word travels fast," Lawrence observed. "We wanted you to know that many of us have been documenting incidents for years," Tasha continued, placing a USB drive on his desk. "Recordings, emails, text messages between supervisors. Things that never made it to official HR complaints because we were afraid of retaliation." Lawrence picked up the drive. "This is exactly what I need. Thank you for taking this risk. It's not just about discrimination against passengers," added Derek Johnson, another gate agent. "It's how they treat us too. The company has different standards depending on who you are. As they shared their experiences, Lawrence realized the problem was even more pervasive than he had initially thought. It wasn't just a few bad employees, it was a corporate culture that enabled and even rewarded discriminatory behavior. After they left, Lawrence continued reviewing documents until midnight. As he prepared to leave for his hotel, he noticed a plain envelope that had been slid under his door. Inside was a single typed note, "Back off while you still can. You're not welcome here." Lawrence photographed the note and sent it to Victoria with a message, "They're getting nervous." Good. Meanwhile, across town, Richard Campbell was hosting an emergency strategy session with his most loyal executives. "Reynolds thinks he can walk in here and take over my airline," he fumed, pacing the room. "We need to make him understand that airlines are different from tech companies. We need to show him how quickly things can go wrong when you don't know what you're doing." "What exactly are you suggesting?" asked the chief operating officer nervously. Campbell smiled coldly. "Reynolds wants to focus on discrimination. Fine. Let's give him so many operational problems that he won't have time to worry about who sits in first class." The next morning, Lawrence arrived to find his security access revoked. When he called Diana Foster about it, she apologetically explained it was a system glitch that would take hours to fix. Throughout the day, he faced similar obstacles: missing files, cancelled meetings, executives suddenly unavailable. Undeterred, Lawrence set up meetings with Sky Elite's minority employees, gathering more testimonies and evidence. By the end of the day, he had reached 45% ownership through additional stock purchases, approaching the threshold that would give him complete control. That night, Victoria discovered something troubling. "Campbell is organizing a walkout," she told Lawrence during a secure call. "He's telling supervisors to claim they can't work under the new, hostile environment you're creating by investigating discrimination claims." Lawrence considered this information. "He's getting desperate. He's dangerous," Victoria corrected. "Airline operations are complex. If enough key personnel walk out simultaneously, it could cause significant disruptions. Then we need to move faster than he expects," Lawrence decided. "How quickly can we implement the full audit?" "The team is ready," Victoria confirmed. "But Lawrence, this is a major escalation. Are you sure?" Lawrence thought about the note under his door, about Tasha Robinson and her colleagues risking their jobs to provide evidence, about the decades of discrimination that had gone unchallenged. "I'm sure," he said firmly. "Campbell wants to play hardball. Let's show him what that really means." Throughout the night, Lawrence worked with Victoria and a team of aviation operations experts they had quietly assembled. By dawn, they had developed a comprehensive plan that would shock not just Richard Campbell, but the entire airline industry. The news broke at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. Tech billionaire Lawrence Reynolds claims discrimination, acquires controlling interest in Sky Elite Airlines. Within hours, Lawrence's recorded confrontation with Bradley Cooper and Heather Wilson had gone viral, shared millions of times across social media platforms. The hashtag #FlySkyEliteWhileBlack began trending nationwide as others came forward with their own stories of discrimination on Sky Elite flights. Have you ever stood up against discrimination like Lawrence did? Or have you witnessed someone being treated unfairly because of their race? Comment number 1 if you've experienced or witnessed racial discrimination while traveling, or number 2 if you believe Lawrence's takeover is teaching Sky Elite a valuable lesson. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice being served. By 9 a.m., major news networks were running the story as their lead, with financial analysts scrambling to explain the implications of the takeover. Sky Elite's stock price plummeted 15% in the first hour of trading as investors reacted to the controversy and uncertainty. Richard Campbell appeared on Morning Business Report, attempting to control the narrative. Dressed impeccably in a dark suit with Sky Elite's logo pin on his lapel, he projected calm confidence that didn't quite reach his eyes. "While we take all customer concerns seriously," Campbell stated smoothly, "this appears to be an opportunistic attempt to leverage an isolated incident into a corporate takeover. Sky Elite has always prided itself on treating all passengers with respect. The interviewer, Angela Ramirez, wasn't letting him off easy. "Mr. Campbell, we've received dozens of statements from former passengers describing similar experiences to Mr. Reynolds. How do you respond to allegations that this represents a pattern at Sky Elite?" Campbell's smile tightened. "Anecdotal complaints don't constitute a pattern. With millions of passengers annually, any airline will receive complaints. We investigate each one thoroughly. Including the 8 formal complaints against Heather Wilson, the gate agent who questioned Mr. Reynolds' first-class ticket multiple times." Campbell's composure slipped momentarily. "I'm not at liberty to discuss personnel matters on television." Meanwhile, Lawrence had declined all immediate interview requests, focusing instead on solidifying his control of the airline. His only public statement was brief and measured: "What happened to me happens to people of color every day. The difference is, I have the resources to do something about it. This isn't about revenge, it's about transformation." The contrast between Campbell's defensive media tour and Lawrence's dignified restraint was not lost on observers. By midday, social media was flooded with personal accounts from passengers and employees describing discriminatory treatment at Sky Elite. Nathan Taylor, Lawrence's childhood friend who had become a respected journalist at The Atlantic, published a feature story titled "First Class Citizenship: How America's Skies Remain Segregated." The article placed Lawrence's experience in the broader context of discrimination in the travel industry, featuring interviews with aviation experts, civil rights attorneys, and former Sky Elite employees. When Lawrence Reynolds was asked to give up his first-class seat despite having paid for it, he experienced what many black travelers have faced for decades, Taylor wrote. The difference is that Reynolds had the means to respond in a way most victims of discrimination cannot. By buying the airline. The article went viral, shared by celebrities and politicians alike. Within hours, 3 major companies announced they were suspending their corporate partnerships with Sky Elite pending resolution of the discrimination allegations. At Sky Elite headquarters, panic was setting in. Campbell had called an emergency board meeting for 3 p.m., but Lawrence had preempted him by scheduling his own board meeting for 2 p.m. as the majority shareholder. "Gentlemen, ladies," Lawrence addressed the assembled board members, "in light of the serious allegations that have emerged, I believe immediate action is necessary to restore public confidence in Sky Elite." He proposed a series of immediate measures. Placing Bradley Cooper and Heather Wilson on administrative leave pending investigation, hiring an independent firm to audit all discrimination complaints, and establishing a diversity and inclusion task force with actual authority to implement changes. The board, seeing the public relations disaster unfolding and concerned about their own reputations, voted to approve all measures despite Campbell's vehement objections. When Campbell arrived for his scheduled meeting at 3 p.m., he found the board room empty except for Lawrence. "What the hell is going on?" Campbell demanded. "Where is everyone?" "The board meeting concluded an hour ago," Lawrence replied calmly. "All my proposals were approved." Campbell's face reddened. "You had no right to, as majority shareholder." "I had every right," Lawrence interrupted. "By the way, Bradley Cooper and Heather Wilson have been placed on administrative leave, effective immediately." Campbell slammed his fist on the table. "This is my airline. You can't just waltz in here and, it's not your airline anymore," Lawrence said, sliding a document across the table. "As of 30 minutes ago, I own 51% of Sky Elite. The board has acknowledged my controlling interest." Campbell scanned the document, his hands shaking with rage. "This won't stand. I'll fight this with every resource at my disposal." "You're welcome to try," Lawrence replied. "But while you're planning your counterattack, you might want to address the media camped outside. They're very interested in your response to the leaked emails showing you personally dismissed multiple discrimination complaints." Campbell paled. "What emails?" Lawrence stood up. "The ones that arrived anonymously at every major news outlet an hour ago. Fascinating reading. particularly your directive to ensure first class maintains a certain atmosphere for preferred customers. As Lawrence walked out, Campbell called after him. You have no idea what you're doing. Running an airline isn't like running a tech company. You'll destroy everything. Lawrence paused at the door. That's where you're wrong, Richard. I'm not going to destroy anything. I'm going to rebuild it, better than it was before. By evening, the situation had escalated further. More employees came forward with discrimination accounts. Sky Elite's customer service lines were overwhelmed with cancellation requests. The stock had fallen 23% by market close. Heather Wilson appeared on a conservative news program, claiming she was being scapegoated. I treat all passengers the same, she insisted tearfully. This is reverse discrimination against me because I'm white. Her performance backfired spectacularly when viewers identified her from Lawrence's viral video, and social media erupted with accounts from other passengers who had experienced similar treatment from her. Bradley Cooper maintained a lower profile, but investigative reporters discovered he had been fired from 2 previous airlines for customer service issues before being hired by Sky Elite. As Lawrence worked late into the night at Sky Elite headquarters, reviewing operations manuals and discrimination complaints, he received a text message from Victoria, "It's done. 51% ownership officially recorded. You now have complete control." Lawrence took a moment to absorb this milestone. What had begun as a response to personal humiliation had evolved into something much larger, a chance to address systemic discrimination that affected countless travelers. He drafted a company-wide email to be sent first thing in the morning, effective immediately. I am assuming the position of acting CEO of Sky Elite Airlines. Richard Campbell has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation of his role in fostering a discriminatory corporate culture. Change begins today. What Lawrence didn't include in the email was his most dramatic plan, one that would send shockwaves through the entire aviation industry and make headlines worldwide. A plan he would implement within 24 hours, before Campbell or anyone else could mount an effective resistance. Do you think Lawrence is making the right moves? What would you do in his position now that you have full control of the airline? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for the next part of this incredible story. At 7 a.m. sharp, Lawrence Reynolds walked through the main entrance of Sky Elite headquarters. Unlike his previous visits, today he wore no suit, no tie, just dark jeans, a black turtleneck, and a determined expression. This wasn't a day for corporate pageantry. It was a day for action. Security guards who had been briefed on the ownership change nodded respectfully. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds," the lead guard said, handing him a new access badge that read Lawrence Reynolds, acting CEO. The executive floor was buzzing with nervous energy. Word of Richard Campbell's administrative leave had spread, and Lawrence's company-wide email announcing his assumption of the CEO position had landed in inboxes 30 minutes earlier. Lawrence strode directly to the CEO's corner office, Campbell's former domain. The executive assistant stationed outside, a young woman named Melissa Hart, stood up anxiously as he approached. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, "Mr. Campbell called this morning and instructed me not to allow anyone into his office until he arrives." Lawrence smiled gently. "Ms. Hart, I understand your loyalty, but Mr. Campbell is no longer in charge here. I am. And I'd appreciate your assistance during this transition." Melissa hesitated, then nodded. "What can I do to help?" "First, please call a meeting of all department heads for 9 a.m. in the main conference room. Then I'll need access to all operational systems and protocols." Inside Campbell's office, his office now, Lawrence took a moment to observe the space. Expensive artwork, photographs of Campbell with politicians and celebrities, industry awards displayed prominently. All symbols of power and status, but little evidence of concern for passengers or employees. Lawrence's first act was to remove a particularly ostentatious painting and replace it with a framed copy of Sky Elite's original mission statement from when the airline was founded 30 years earlier. To provide safe, dignified, and equal service to all who fly with us. By 9 a.m., the conference room was filled with nervous department heads and executives. Many had aligned themselves with Campbell for years, and uncertainty about their own futures hung heavy in the air. Lawrence entered precisely on time, accompanied by Victoria Chen and a small team of experts he had assembled. Aviation operations specialists, HR consultants specializing in corporate culture transformation, and data analysts. "Good morning," Lawrence began. "I know many of you are concerned about what happens next. Let me be clear, my goal is not to dismantle Sky Elite, but to transform it into the airline it always claimed to be, one that treats every passenger and employee with dignity and respect." He paused, looking around the room. Some faces showed relief, others skepticism, a few outright hostility. "I've spent the past 48 hours reviewing Sky Elite's operational procedures, customer service protocols, and employee policies. What I've found is deeply troubling." Lawrence projected a series of internal documents onto the screen. "These are service directives for first-class cabins. Note the highlighted section instructing flight attendants to verify the status of passengers who appear out of place in premium cabins. This coded language has resulted in systemic discrimination against passengers of color." Several executives shifted uncomfortably. A middle-aged white man raised his hand. "With all due respect, Mr. Reynolds, those protocols are designed to protect our premium experience for legitimate first-class passengers." "And what makes a passenger legitimate, Mr. Anderson?" "Charles Anderson, VP of Customer Experience." Lawrence nodded. "Mr. Anderson, I paid $4,000 for my first-class ticket. I have flown over 100,000 miles on Sky Elite this year alone. Yet I was deemed not legitimate enough to sit in the seat I purchased. Would you care to explain why?" Anderson had no answer. Lawrence continued through his presentation, methodically exposing the systemic issues within Sky Elite, from discriminatory hiring practices to the troubling pattern of overbooking first class and bumping minority passengers first. "Most disturbing," Lawrence said, showing another document, "is this executive decision to routinely overbook first-class cabins by 15%, with internal guidelines suggesting which passengers should be reaccommodated first. The pattern in these reaccommodations is unmistakable." The presentation continued for an hour, laying bare the deeply rooted problems within Sky Elite. When Lawrence finished, he opened the floor for questions. "What exactly do you plan to do?" asked Diana Foster, the HR director who had provided Lawrence with the initial personnel files. "These are complex cultural issues that can't be fixed overnight." "You're absolutely right," Lawrence acknowledged. "Cultural transformation takes time. But accountability can begin immediately." He outlined his initial changes: mandatory anti-discrimination training for all customer-facing staff, a review of all promotion practices, revision of first-class service protocols, and the establishment of an independent passenger advocacy office with actual authority. Additionally, Lawrence announced, effective immediately, "I'm implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. One substantiated incident will result in immediate termination." This statement caused a stir among the executives. "That's extremely harsh," protested Anderson. "Mistakes happen. Misunderstandings occur. Refusing service to someone because of their race isn't a misunderstanding, Mr. Anderson. It's discrimination. And it ends today." As the meeting concluded, Lawrence asked the Chief Information Officer to stay behind. "I need immediate access to all flight systems and operational protocols," he instructed. "My team will be conducting a comprehensive audit starting now." Throughout the day, Lawrence and his team worked methodically, reviewing every aspect of Sky Elite's operations. What they discovered was even more troubling than the discrimination issues. Campbell's aggressive cost-cutting had compromised not just customer service, but potentially safety as well. Maintenance schedules had been stretched to the absolute regulatory limits. Pilot training hours had been reduced to the minimum required by law. Ground crews were understaffed at major hubs, leading to rushed pre-flight checks. This goes beyond discrimination, Lawrence told Victoria as they reviewed the findings. Campbell was cutting corners everywhere to maximize short-term profits. As evening approached, Lawrence's security team intercepted troubling information. Campbell, though officially on administrative leave, had been contacting loyal employees throughout the day, encouraging resistance to the new leadership. He's organizing what amounts to a sabotage campaign, the head of security reported, showing Lawrence intercepted text messages. Several key operations staff are planning to call in sick tomorrow, and there's talk of pilots staging a safety concern walkout. Lawrence considered this information carefully. How many employees are involved? Based on our monitoring, about 30 key personnel, including 8 pilots and 15 senior ground operations staff. Lawrence nodded. Enough to cause significant disruptions. At 8 p.m., Lawrence called an emergency meeting with his core team. Campbell is more desperate than I anticipated, he told them. He's willing to disrupt Sky Elite's operations to maintain control. We could bring in replacement personnel, suggested one advisor. There are agencies that specialize in aviation staffing during labor disputes. Lawrence shook his head. This isn't just about keeping planes flying. It's about ensuring they fly safely. He was silent for a moment, then made his decision. We need to be proactive rather than reactive. It's time for the system audit. The full grounding? Victoria asked, surprised. Are you sure? That's our nuclear option. Campbell has forced our hand, Lawrence replied. If he's willing to compromise operations to maintain control, we need to take that power away from him completely. Through the night, Lawrence and his team prepared for what would be the most dramatic action in Sky Elite's history. Legal documents were drafted. Regulatory notifications were prepared. A comprehensive communications plan was developed. At 5 a.m., Lawrence received an anonymous email containing recordings of a secret meeting Campbell had held with loyal executives. In it, Campbell could be clearly heard instructing them to make operations so chaotic that Reynolds will have no choice but to reinstate me. That was the final piece Lawrence needed. At 5:30 a.m., he made the call that would shock the aviation world. This is Lawrence Reynolds, acting CEO of Sky Elite Airlines. I am implementing Emergency Protocol Alpha, effective immediately. Ground all aircraft. I repeat, ground all aircraft. Across the country, Sky Elite's operations centers received the unprecedented order. Planes already in the air would continue to their destinations, but no new Sky Elite flights would take off until further notice. By sunrise, hundreds of Sky Elite planes sat motionless on runways nationwide. The most dramatic airline grounding since 9/11 had begun, not due to terrorism or mechanical failure, but because of one CEO's determination to transform a broken system, whatever the cost. Chaos erupted at airports nationwide as dawn broke over a landscape of grounded Sky Elite aircraft. Terminal screens flashed with cancellation notices. Customer service lines stretched through terminals. Social media exploded with angry passengers demanding explanations. The financial news networks cut to breaking coverage. In an unprecedented move, Sky Elite Airlines has grounded its entire fleet of over 700 aircraft nationwide. The airline, already embroiled in controversy following tech billionaire Lawrence Reynolds' takeover, has provided no immediate explanation for the grounding. At Sky Elite's operations center in Atlanta, Lawrence stood before wall-mounted screens displaying the airline's immobilized fleet. Red icons represented each grounded aircraft, a sea of stillness in an industry defined by constant motion. Sir, the operations director approached nervously, we have over 90,000 passengers stranded. The call centers are overwhelmed. The FAA is demanding an explanation. And the board members are calling non-stop. Lawrence nodded calmly. I understand the disruption this is causing. Implement the passenger accommodation plan immediately. Full hotel coverage for all stranded passengers, meal vouchers, and rebooking assistance with partner airlines. That will cost millions, the director protested. The cost of continuing unsafe operations would be immeasurable, Lawrence replied firmly. Begin the comprehensive safety audit as planned. I want every aircraft, every procedure, and every record examined. Meanwhile, Richard Campbell had wasted no time capitalizing on the crisis. Despite being on administrative leave, he appeared on every news program that would have him, projecting an image of the experienced airline executive watching an amateur destroy his company. This is exactly what happens when someone with no aviation experience tries to run an airline, Campbell told one interviewer, his expression a practiced mix of concern and restraint. Reynolds is having an emotional overreaction to a minor service issue, and 90,000 passengers are paying the price. When asked about the discrimination allegations, Campbell dismissed them smoothly. Every airline occasionally has service failures. That's regrettable but hardly justifies grounding an entire fleet and potentially destroying a company that employs 30,000 people. Financial analysts were equally harsh in their assessments. Sky Elite stock has plummeted 47% since the grounding announcement, reported one analyst. If this continues for more than 24 hours, we could be looking at bankruptcy proceedings. This appears to be a classic case of a vindictive takeover gone wrong. Social media was flooded with #SkyEliteChaos posts from stranded passengers. News helicopters circled major airports, broadcasting images of Sky Elite planes sitting idle at gates and on tarmacs across the country. At noon, the Sky Elite board of directors convened an emergency virtual meeting. Lawrence joined from his command center at headquarters, facing a gallery of angry faces on the video conference screen. Mr. Reynolds, board chairman William Preston began, barely containing his fury, the board demands an immediate explanation for this reckless action. You've potentially destroyed Sky Elite in less than 24 hours. Lawrence remained composed. Chairman Preston, board members, I understand your concerns. But there's something you don't know yet. He shared his screen, displaying internal documents his team had discovered overnight. These maintenance records show that under Mr. Campbell's direction, Sky Elite has been systematically extending maintenance intervals beyond manufacturer recommendations. Not beyond FAA minimums, they were careful about that, but well beyond what Boeing and Airbus consider safe practice. The board members leaned closer to their screens, expressions shifting from anger to concern. Furthermore, Lawrence continued, displaying more documents, we've discovered that safety incidents were routinely downgraded in classification to avoid mandatory reporting to the FAA. Over the past 3 years, 67 incidents that should have triggered regulatory review were deliberately misclassified. The mood in the virtual boardroom shifted palpably. How did you discover this? Preston asked, his earlier hostility replaced with genuine concern. My background is in cybersecurity, Lawrence reminded them. When we began reviewing Sky Elite systems, we found a secondary record-keeping system accessible only to Campbell and 3 senior executives. It contained the true incident reports alongside the altered versions submitted to regulators. Lawrence continued methodically presenting evidence of safety compromises. Pilot rest periods calculated using creative accounting, maintenance performed by uncertified technicians, known equipment issues deferred repeatedly beyond recommended limits. So you see, Lawrence concluded, this grounding wasn't an emotional response to discrimination. It was a necessary safety measure based on what we discovered. I couldn't in good conscience allow a single Sky Elite plane to take off until we've conducted a thorough safety audit. The board meeting ended with a unanimous vote supporting Lawrence's decision to ground the fleet pending completion of the safety audit. What had begun as a confrontation had transformed into a grim recognition of how far Sky Elite had fallen under Campbell's leadership. Following the board meeting, Lawrence received word that FAA investigators had arrived at headquarters. They had received an anonymous tip, which Lawrence strongly suspected came from someone on his team, about potential safety violations. Mr. Reynolds, the lead FAA investigator, said as they were shown into Lawrence's office, we understand you've grounded your fleet. We need to know why. Lawrence handed over the files his team had compiled. This is why. Sky Elite has been operating with compromised safety standards for years. I discovered it during our internal review and took immediate action. The investigators spent hours reviewing the documents, occasionally looking up with expressions of disbelief or concern. If these records are accurate, the lead investigator finally said, Sky Elite has been operating in violation of multiple federal safety regulations. They're accurate, Lawrence confirmed. And there's more. We're still uncovering the full extent of the issues. By late afternoon, news of the safety allegations had leaked to the media, completely changing the narrative. Headlines shifted from Tech CEO's Revenge Grounds Airline to Sky Elite Grounding, Safety Concerns Revealed. Richard Campbell, who had been giving interviews all day attacking Lawrence's leadership, suddenly went silent. His attorney released a brief statement. Mr. Campbell denies any knowledge of safety violations and looks forward to cooperating with any investigation. At 6 p.m., Lawrence held his first press conference as Sky Elite CEO. The company's massive media center was packed with journalists, all clamoring for explanations. Lawrence approached the podium, composed and resolute. The room fell silent. Good evening. 3 days ago, I experienced discrimination as a passenger on a Sky Elite flight. That incident led me to look more closely at this airline, and what I discovered was disturbing. Not just a culture of discrimination, but a pattern of decisions that prioritized profit over people, cost-cutting over safety. He outlined the safety violations his team had uncovered, the systematic discrimination embedded in company policies, and his decision to ground the fleet. I want to be clear, this grounding was not an act of revenge. It was an act of responsibility. Every Sky Elite aircraft will remain on the ground until we have thoroughly inspected each plane, reviewed every procedure, and can absolutely guarantee the safety of our passengers and crew. Lawrence then addressed the stranded passengers directly. To everyone whose travel has been disrupted, I sincerely apologize. Sky Elite will provide full compensation, including hotel accommodations, meals, and rebooking on partner airlines. Additionally, every affected passenger will receive a full refund and a voucher for future travel once our service resumes. As questions erupted from the journalists, Lawrence raised his hand for silence. There's one more thing. What began as a response to discrimination has revealed deeper problems at Sky Elite. Problems that can't be fixed with minor adjustments or sensitivity training. They require a complete transformation of this company's culture and operations. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. Today, I'm announcing a complete restructuring of Sky Elite Airlines. When our planes return to the sky, it will be as a different company, one that truly values safety, dignity, and equality for all passengers and employees. The press conference continued for an hour as Lawrence fielded questions with remarkable candor. By the time it concluded, public sentiment was shifting. While passengers remained frustrated by the disruptions, many expressed support for the focus on safety and accountability. That evening, as Lawrence stood in the Sky Elite Operations Center watching the status boards, his phone buzzed with a text message from Richard Campbell, "You've destroyed everything." Lawrence smiled slightly, remembering how it had all begun just days ago with a boarding pass and a racial slur. He typed a simple reply, "No, Richard. I'm fixing everything you broke." 3 months after the historic grounding, a gleaming white aircraft with bold blue trim taxied toward the runway at Atlanta International Airport. Gone was the Sky Elite logo, replaced by the sleek emblem of Ascension Airlines, and its new tagline, "Rising Together." In the cockpit, Lawrence Reynolds sat in the captain's seat, his private pilot's license recently supplemented with commercial training. This ceremonial first flight of the rebranded airline represented the culmination of the most dramatic turnaround in aviation history. The terminal was crowded with media, industry executives, and employees wearing new Ascension uniforms. On a special viewing platform, Lawrence's father watched with tears in his eyes, remembering the little boy who had pressed his face against airport fences, dreaming of flight. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of transformation. The safety audit had revealed even more problems than initially discovered, leading to a complete overhaul of maintenance procedures, training protocols, and operational standards. Every aircraft in the fleet had undergone comprehensive inspection and necessary repairs, regardless of cost. But the changes went far beyond mechanical fixes. Lawrence had implemented the most progressive anti-discrimination policies in the industry, with mandatory training for all employees and clear consequences for violations. The new management team reflected the diversity of America itself, with talented professionals from all backgrounds filling key leadership positions. Heather Wilson and Bradley Cooper had been terminated within days of the takeover, their personnel files revealing multiple instances of discriminatory behavior that Campbell's administration had ignored or even rewarded. Both now faced multiple civil lawsuits from passengers who had experienced similar treatment. Richard Campbell's fall had been spectacular. The FAA investigation had uncovered his direct involvement in falsifying safety records, leading to criminal charges. His carefully cultivated image as an industry leader had crumbled as former colleagues rushed to distance themselves from the scandal. Inside the terminal, Victoria Chen watched the preparations for takeoff with satisfaction. "Remember when you said this wasn't about revenge?" she asked Lawrence during their final meeting before the flight. Lawrence nodded. "It wasn't. And it isn't." "I know," Victoria smiled. "It's about transformation. And you've achieved something remarkable here." Indeed, Ascension Airlines had quickly become the industry's new standard-bearer. The comprehensive anti-discrimination policies Lawrence implemented were being studied and adopted by other airlines. The transparent approach to safety had restored passenger confidence, with bookings exceeding projections for the relaunch. Most surprisingly to financial analysts, Ascension's stock had not only recovered but reached an all-time high, proving that ethical business practices and profitability weren't mutually exclusive. As Lawrence prepared for takeoff, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. What had begun as a humiliating experience had catalyzed a movement for change far beyond one airline or one incident. The ceremonial flight would carry special passengers. Individuals who had experienced discrimination on Sky Elite flights and had come forward during the investigation. Lawrence had offered them all lifetime flight benefits with Ascension, a small but meaningful acknowledgement of their experiences. Among them was an elderly black woman named Eleanor Jackson, who had been denied assistance despite her visible mobility challenges on a Sky Elite flight 2 years earlier. Lawrence had personally ensured she would receive VIP treatment on this inaugural journey. As passengers boarded, Lawrence stepped from the cockpit to greet them, shaking hands and thanking them for being part of this historic moment. When Eleanor arrived, he personally escorted her to her first-class seat. "Mr. Reynolds," she said as he helped her settle in, "I need to tell you something." Lawrence sat in the empty seat beside her. "What is it, Mrs. Jackson?" "My son was a frequent flyer with Sky Elite," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "He experienced what you did, many times. Being questioned, moved, treated like he didn't belong. It wore him down over the years." Lawrence nodded, understanding all too well. "He filed complaints. Nothing changed. Eventually, the stress contributed to his health problems." She paused. "He passed away last year. He didn't live to see this day, but I know he's watching somehow." Lawrence took her hand gently. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Jackson. And I'm sorry the system failed your son." "You've done what he couldn't," she replied. "You've changed that system. Not just for black travelers, but for everyone who deserves to be treated with dignity." As Lawrence returned to the cockpit for takeoff, Eleanor's words stayed with him. This transformation wasn't just about correcting his own experience. It was about addressing a systemic problem that had affected countless travelers for decades. The engines hummed to life. Lawrence completed his pre-flight checks with meticulous care, then spoke into his headset. "Ascension 1 requesting clearance for takeoff." As the aircraft accelerated down the runway and lifted into the clear blue sky, Lawrence felt a profound sense of completion. The frightened boy who had watched planes from behind a fence had grown into a man who not only flew them but had transformed an entire industry. Banking gently toward the setting sun, Lawrence thought about his next challenge. Airlines weren't the only industry where discrimination persisted behind a veneer of corporate policies and plausible deniability. Banking, housing, healthcare, all had systemic issues that affected people of color disproportionately. And Lawrence Reynolds now had a proven playbook for transformation. In the passenger cabin, Eleanor Jackson looked out her window at the clouds gilded by the setting sun. She felt her son's presence somehow, sharing this moment of vindication and hope. As the plane climbed higher, leaving the old world of discrimination and injustice far below, she whispered, "We're rising together now." What did you think of Lawrence's journey from discrimination victim to industry transformer? Have you witnessed someone turning adversity into positive change? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this tale of justice and transformation inspired you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for joining me for this incredible story of courage and determination. Until next time, remember that one person with conviction can truly change the world. Lawrence Reynolds' journey teaches us that true transformation often begins with personal adversity. When faced with discrimination, we have choices: accept it, fight against a single incident, or address the entire system. Lawrence chose the most difficult but impactful path, using his resources to create lasting change. The story reminds us that discrimination persists in everyday spaces, often hidden behind corporate policies and customer service standards. What makes this tale powerful is not just Lawrence's response to injustice, but his refusal to make it merely about personal vindication. Real change requires strategic thinking, patience, and willingness to face resistance. Lawrence didn't just want an apology, he wanted to rebuild an entire system that enabled discrimination to flourish. Perhaps most importantly, the story shows that ethical business practices and profitability aren't mutually exclusive. By prioritizing dignity, safety, and equality, Ascension Airlines didn't just become more just, it became more successful. For those without Lawrence's resources, the lesson remains valuable: document injustice, build alliances, and recognize that changing systems takes time but creates lasting impact. One person with conviction, resources, and strategic thinking can transform entire industries. ## call to action. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you could change the system? Or have you been inspired by someone who turned adversity into positive change like Lawrence did? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might inspire others to take action. If this journey of transformation resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice and resilience. Don't forget to share with someone who needs this message of hope and empowerment today. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey. Remember, in a world where discrimination still exists, we all have the power to be agents of change, whether we're CEOs or everyday citizens standing up for what's right.